The rain hammered against the faded canvas like 1,000 tiny fists, each drop finding its way through holes that had been growing larger for decades. Marcus Chen stood in the doorway of what his neighbors mockingly called, quote, the eyesore, watching water pool on the cracked concrete floor around the massive, rusted carousel that dominated the center of the rotting circus tent. Paint peeled from wooden horses whose once vibrant colors had faded to ghostly pastels, and the ornate brass poles were green with tarnish. To everyone in Millbrook Falls, this inheritance was nothing more than a cruel joke, played by his eccentric uncle on a man who was already struggling to keep his head above water. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The whispers had started the moment the will was read 3 months ago. Marcus could still hear the barely contained laughter echoing through the lawyer's office when Mr. Hendricks announced that Samuel Chen had left his entire estate to his nephew. The estate, as it turned out, consisted of nothing but debts, a piece of land nobody wanted, and a collapsing circus tent housing a carousel that hadn't turned in 30 years. The other relatives had walked out shaking their heads, some openly snickering about Marcus getting exactly what he deserved for being the family disappointment. Standing there now, Marcus pulled his worn jacket tighter against the October chill that seemed to seep through every gap in the deteriorating structure. His 7-year-old daughter Lily pressed closer to his side, her small hand finding his as she stared up at the motionless horses with a mixture of wonder and uncertainty. She had been asking to see Uncle Sam's surprise for weeks, and Marcus had finally run out of excuses to avoid bringing her here. The medical bills from her mother's cancer treatment had continued mounting even after Sarah's death 2 years ago, and the collection notices were arriving daily now. He had hoped, desperately and foolishly, that maybe his uncle's final gift might offer some small respite from the financial nightmare that had become their lives. Instead, he found himself the reluctant owner of what the county assessor had generously valued at negative $15,000, accounting for the cost of demolition and waste removal that would be required to clear the land. The tent itself was beyond salvage, its support poles tilting at dangerous angles, and the canvas so weathered that it looked like it might collapse under the weight of a strong breeze. The carousel sat silent and still, its music box mechanisms corroded beyond repair, surrounded by broken mirrors and shattered light fixtures that had once made it the crown jewel of Chen's family circus. Marcus remembered visiting this place as a child, when Uncle Sam still traveled the county fair circuit with his small but beloved show. The carousel had been magical then, spinning endlessly to the tinkling melody of the Blue Danube, while children laughed and parents watched with fond smiles. Sam had been larger than life in those days, his booming voice carrying across the midway as he welcomed families to experience a piece of old-world wonder. But that was before the big corporate amusement parks had driven the small traveling circuses out of business, before Sam had been forced to settle the operation here on this forgotten plot of land outside town, watching it slowly decay while he grew old and bitter. Lily tugged on his sleeve, her voice small in the vast, echoing space. "Daddy, why are the horses so sad?" Marcus looked down at his daughter, her dark eyes reflecting the dim light that filtered through the tent's numerous holes. She had inherited her mother's sensitivity, her ability to see emotion and story in everything around her. To most people, these were just broken-down carnival rides. To Lily, they were living things with feelings and histories. "They're not sad, sweetheart," Marcus said, forcing a smile he didn't feel. "They're just sleeping. They've been sleeping for a very long time." It was a lie, but it was kinder than the truth. The truth was that everything here was dying, just like their hopes for a better future. Just like Sarah had died, slowly and painfully, while Marcus watched helplessly from the sidelines, drowning in medical debt and the crushing weight of trying to be enough for both of them. The sound of approaching footsteps on the gravel outside made Marcus turn toward the tent's entrance. 3 figures emerged from the gray afternoon light, and his heart sank as he recognized the distinct silhouette of Harold Brennan, Millbrook Falls' most successful real estate developer. Brennan was flanked by 2 men in expensive suits, their polished shoes completely inappropriate for tramping around a muddy circus lot. Marcus had been dreading this moment since the day he'd inherited the property. "Well, well," Brennan called out, his voice carrying the practiced joviality of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. "If it isn't our new carnival king. How's the entertainment business treating you, Chen?" The 2 men beside him chuckled appreciatively at their boss's humor. Marcus recognized them as lawyers from the firm that handled most of Brennan's deals, vultures who specialized in picking clean the bones of failed dreams. Marcus straightened his shoulders, instinctively moving to shield Lily from the newcomers' predatory gazes. "Mr. Brennan, I wasn't expecting company today." It was a weak response, and they all knew it. In a town the size of Millbrook Falls, everyone knew everyone else's business, and word had traveled fast about Marcus's inheritance and his desperate financial situation. Brennan's smile was all teeth and no warmth as he gestured expansively at the decrepit surroundings. "I have to say, Marcus, your uncle really outdid himself with his final gift. A circus tent that's one strong wind away from collapse, and a merry-go-round that looks like it belongs in a horror movie. It's like he wanted to make sure you'd remember him forever." The lawyers laughed again, right on cue. "What do you want, Harold?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. Brennan had been circling this property for years, waiting for Sam to die or finally accept one of his low-ball offers. The land sat at a prime location just outside the town center, perfect for the kind of strip mall development that was Brennan's specialty. The fact that it now belonged to someone in desperate need of money had undoubtedly made his day. "I want to help you, Marcus," Brennan said, pulling a folded document from his jacket pocket. "I know you're going through a rough patch since Sarah passed, God rest her soul. Medical bills, mortgage payments, raising a little girl on a substitute teacher's salary. It can't be easy." His tone was sympathetic, but his eyes remained cold and calculating. "I'm prepared to offer you $50,000 for this property. Cash. You could have the money in your account by tomorrow morning." Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. $50,000 would barely scratch the surface of what he owed, but it would buy them time. It would keep the bank from foreclosing on their house for a few more months, maybe long enough for him to find a better job or figure out another solution. It was more money than he had any right to expect for what was essentially a liability wrapped in rotting canvas. But something held him back from reaching for the papers. Maybe it was the barely concealed smugness in Brennan's expression, or the way the lawyers were already pulling out pens as if the deal was a foregone conclusion. Maybe it was the memory of Uncle Sam's voice, decades ago, telling him that the Carousel was special, that it had secrets most people would never understand. Or maybe it was just stubborn pride, the same trait that had gotten him into so much trouble over the years. "I need time to think about it," Marcus said quietly, and Brennan's smile faltered slightly. "This was my uncle's life's work. I can't just sell it off without at least trying to understand what he wanted me to do with it." One of the lawyers stepped forward, his voice smooth and professional. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Mr. Chen, with all due respect, there's nothing to understand here. This is a condemned structure on a piece of land that's costing you money every day you own it. The county will require environmental testing, asbestos removal, proper disposal of the materials. You're looking at cleanup costs in the six-figure range, easy. Not to mention the liability issues," the other lawyer added. "If someone gets hurt on this property, you're personally responsible. A child could wander in here and get seriously injured by all this rusty metal and broken glass. Do you really want that on your conscience?" Lily had been listening to the conversation with the intense focus that children bring to adult discussions they don't quite understand. Now she spoke up, her voice small but clear in the cavernous space. "The horses aren't scary. They just need someone to love them again." The three men looked at her with expressions ranging from amusement to mild irritation, but Marcus saw something shift in his daughter's eyes. She was looking at the carousel with a different kind of attention now, her head tilted slightly as if she were listening to something only she could hear. She let go of his hand and walked closer to the massive mechanism, stopping in front of a particularly elaborate horse with a flowing mane and what had once been an intricate saddle covered in painted flowers. "This one's name is Rosalind," she said matter-of-factly, reaching up to touch the horse's carved nose. "She told me she used to be beautiful, and she can be beautiful again if someone believes in her." Brennan exchanged a look with his lawyers, clearly uncomfortable with the turn the conversation had taken. "Kids say the darndest things, don't they? Look, Marcus, I don't want to pressure you, but this offer won't stay on the table forever. I've got other properties I'm looking at, and frankly, this place is more trouble than it's worth at any price." "Then why do you want it so badly?" The question came out before Marcus could stop himself, and he saw Brennan's face tighten with annoyance. It was a fair point. If the property was truly worthless, if the cleanup costs were as astronomical as they claimed, why was one of the county's most successful developers so eager to take it off his hands? "I'm being charitable," Brennan said, but the words rang false. "Consider it a favor to Sarah's memory. She was a good woman, and I know she'd want her family taken care of." The mention of his wife's name in Brennan's mouth made Marcus's jaw clench, but he forced himself to remain calm. "I appreciate the offer," Marcus said carefully. "But I meant what I said. I need time to think about it. This is a big decision, and I want to make sure I'm doing right by my daughter's future." He glanced at Lily, who was now walking slowly around the carousel, her small hand trailing along the carved animals as if she were greeting old friends. Brennan's mask of friendliness finally slipped completely. "Don't be an idiot, Chen. This is the best offer you're going to get, and we both know it. Nobody else is going to want this worthless pile of junk. You can take my money and start over somewhere else. Or you can let your pride drag you and that little girl down with this sinking ship." The threat was barely veiled, and Marcus felt a familiar surge of the anger that had gotten him into so many fights as a younger man. But he was a father now, and fathers had to be smarter than their impulses. "I understand your position, Mr. Brennan, but my answer is the same. I need time." For a moment, the two men stared at each other across the faded sawdust and debris that littered the tent floor. Then Brennan smiled again, but this time there was nothing warm or friendly about the expression. "Fine, take your time, but don't take too long. Properties in situations like this have a way of becoming even more expensive to maintain." He folded the contract and slipped it back into his jacket. "Come on, gentlemen. Mr. Chen apparently needs to learn some hard lessons the difficult way." The three men turned and walked out of the tent, their voices carrying back on the afternoon air as they discussed other business. Marcus stood in the sudden silence, his heart pounding with a mixture of relief and dread. He had bought himself time, but at what cost? Every day he delayed was another day of mounting expenses, another day closer to losing everything he and Sarah had worked to build. Lily appeared at his side again, slipping her hand back into his with the casual trust that broke his heart a little more each day. "I'm glad you didn't let them take the horses away, Daddy," she said quietly. "They need us." Marcus looked down at his daughter, this remarkable little person who had somehow inherited the best parts of both her parents while avoiding most of their weaknesses. "What makes you so sure about that, sweetheart?" She considered the question with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. "When Mommy was sick, she told me that sometimes the most broken things are the most valuable, because fixing them teaches us how strong we really are." She paused, looking back at the carousel. "I think Uncle Sam wanted you to learn how strong you are." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, not because they were painful, but because they rang with the kind of truth that only children could speak. Sarah had said something similar during her final weeks, when the pain had been at its worst, but her spirit had somehow remained unbroken. She had talked about the value of struggle, about how the most important growth happened in the darkest moments when giving up seemed like the only option. That night, after Lily was safely asleep in her bed, Marcus sat at their kitchen table surrounded by bills and overdue notices, trying to make sense of numbers that refused to add up to anything resembling hope. The mortgage payment was 3 months behind, the credit cards were maxed out. The hospital had already sent 2 collection agencies after him, and a third was threatening legal action. Brennan's $50,000 looked more attractive with each passing hour. But something nagged at him, a persistent itch in the back of his mind that wouldn't let him rest. He pulled out his laptop and began searching for information about antique carousels, about the history of Chen's family circus, about anything that might explain why a successful businessman would be so eager to acquire what appeared to be worthless junk. The internet yielded surprisingly little information about his uncle's operation. A few old newspaper clippings mentioned Chen's family circus appearing at county fairs in the 1970s and 80s, but nothing about the carousel specifically. Marcus found some general information about the value of antique amusement park rides, but most of the examples involved pieces that were in pristine condition, not rotting away in a collapsing tent. He was about to give up when he stumbled across a forum dedicated to carousel enthusiasts. The conversation threads were filled with technical discussions about carving techniques and restoration methods. But one post caught his attention. A user with the handle Antique Writer had posted a query about a carousel that had supposedly been carved by the famous German craftsman Heinrich Müller in the early 1900s. The post included a grainy photograph that made Marcus's pulse quicken. The carved horse in the photo bore an unmistakable resemblance to several of the animals on Uncle Sam's carousel. The flowing mane, the particular style of the decorative saddle, the way the hooves were positioned. Marcus screenshot the image and spent the next hour comparing it to his memories of what he had seen that afternoon. The more he looked, the more convinced he became that there was a connection. According to the forum post, Heinrich Müller had been one of the most sought-after carousel carvers of his era, creating elaborate works of art for wealthy clients across Europe and America. Only a handful of his pieces were known to still exist, and they were worth enormous sums to collectors. The post mentioned that one of Müller's carousels had sold at auction for over $2 million just the year before. But the forum user was specifically asking about a piece called The Lost Carousel of Wonderland, which Müller had allegedly created for a private collector in New York sometime around 1905. According to the story, the carousel had disappeared during the chaos of the Great Depression, sold off to pay debts, and had never been seen again. The user was offering a substantial reward for any information about its whereabouts. Marcus felt his hands trembling as he typed out a private message to Antique Writer, attaching the best photos he had managed to take with his phone that afternoon. He didn't mention the location or his ownership of the piece, just asked if the expert could help identify what he was looking at. Then he closed the laptop and tried to get some sleep, though his mind raced with possibilities that seemed too incredible to be real. The response came at dawn, appearing in his inbox like a gift from the universe. Antique Writer had identified several definitive markers of Müller's craftsmanship in the photos, particularly a distinctive rose pattern that the master carver had used as his signature. But more importantly, the expert believed this might actually be the lost carousel of Wonderland, the holy grail of antique amusement ride collecting. The message included contact information for Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, a professor of art history at Columbia University who specialized in turn-of-the-century decorative arts. Dr. Hartwell had been searching for this particular carousel for over 20 years as part of her research into Müller's lost works. If Marcus truly had possession of an authenticated Müller carousel, particularly the Wonderland piece, he was looking at a value that could reach into the tens of millions of dollars. Marcus read the message 3 times before the information fully sank in. $10 million. Not the $50,000 that Brennan had offered. Not even the few $100,000 that Marcus had dared to dream about in his most optimistic moments. $10 million would solve every problem he and Lily faced. It would pay off the medical debt, save their house, and provide security for the rest of their lives. But first, he needed proof. And that meant taking a much closer look at Uncle Sam's carousel than he had managed during his brief visit with Brennan and his lawyers breathing down his neck. Marcus called in sick to work, arranged for Lily to spend the day with her babysitter, and drove out to the property with a flashlight, a camera, and a heart full of desperate hope. The tent looked even more decrepit in the harsh light of morning, its canvas walls sagging and torn, held up by guy wires that sang mournfully in the October wind. Marcus ducked through the entrance and made his way carefully across the debris-strewn floor to where the carousel sat in silent majesty. Up close, with proper lighting and time to examine the details, he began to see things he had missed during his previous visits. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, even beneath the layers of grime and neglect. Each horse was unique, carved with an attention to detail that spoke of true artistry rather than mass production. The saddles bore intricate patterns of roses and vines, painted in colors that had faded but still hinted at their former brilliance. The brass poles were tarnished but solid, their surfaces decorated with spiraling designs that caught and reflected the flashlight beam. But it was when Marcus climbed up onto the central platform that he made the discovery that changed everything. Hidden beneath decades of dust and grease, carved into the very heart of the carousel's mechanism, was a small plaque bearing an inscription in elaborate German script. Marcus cleaned it carefully with his sleeve, revealing words that made his breath catch in his throat. Heinrich Müller, Kunsthandwerker, 1905, Geschaffen für das Wunderland der Traum, created for the Wonderland of Dreams. This was it. This was the lost carousel of Wonderland, sitting forgotten in a rotting tent while the world's collectors and museums searched desperately for any trace of its existence. Marcus thought of all the years Uncle Sam had traveled the county fair circuit with this masterpiece, charging children 50 cents for a ride on what might be the most valuable piece of folk art in America. The sound of approaching vehicles outside the tent jolted Marcus from his thoughts. Through a gap in the canvas, he could see 3 black SUVs pulling up on the gravel, their tinted windows making it impossible to see who was inside. His first thought was that Brennan had decided to apply more pressure, but as the doors opened and men in dark suits emerged, Marcus realized this was something much more serious. The men moved with military precision, spreading out to surround the tent while their apparent leader, a tall man with silver hair and cold eyes, walked directly to the entrance. Marcus quickly pocketed his camera and climbed down from the carousel platform, his mind racing as he tried to figure out what he had stumbled into. "Mr. Chen," the silver-haired man called out as he entered the tent. "My name is Vincent Castellano. I represent certain interests that have a claim on this property and its contents." His voice was cultured, with just a hint of an accent that Marcus couldn't place. "I understand you've recently inherited this establishment from your late uncle." Marcus felt every instinct screaming at him to run, but there was nowhere to go. The tent was surrounded, and these men clearly knew exactly who he was and why he was here. "I'm not sure what you mean by claim," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. "My uncle left this property to me legally. I have the paperwork." Castellano smiled, but it was the kind of expression that made predators before they struck. "I'm sure you do. Samuel Chen was always very careful about documentation, but there are some complications that your uncle may not have mentioned." He gestured for one of his men to bring forward a briefcase, from which he extracted a thick folder of documents. "Your uncle borrowed a significant sum of money many years ago to purchase this carousel," Castellano continued, laying the papers out on a nearby crate. "The loan was secured against the piece itself, with very specific terms regarding its ownership and transfer. When Samuel died, that debt passed to his estate, which means it passed to you." Marcus felt the bottom drop out of his world as he scanned the documents. The loan agreement was dated 1987 for the sum of $500,000, with compound interest that had grown the debt to over $2 million by now. The carousel was listed as collateral, and there was a clause stating that if the borrower died without having repaid the loan, the lender could claim the collateral immediately. "This is impossible," Marcus said, his voice hoarse with shock. "My uncle would never have borrowed this kind of money. And who loans $500,000 on a carousel that's worth maybe $10,000? "Someone who knows the true value of what they're lending against," Castellano replied smoothly. "Your uncle was in serious financial trouble in the late 1980s. His circus was failing, he had tax debts, and he was facing bankruptcy. My employer offered him a lifeline, accepting the carousel as security because we understood its historical significance." Marcus stared at the documents, his mind reeling. If this was legitimate, if Uncle Sam had really borrowed against the carousel and never repaid the loan, then everything was lost. The most valuable discovery of his lifetime was about to be taken away by loan sharks, who had been waiting 37 years to collect their due. But something didn't add up. If these people had known about the carousel's true value all along, why had they let Uncle Sam keep it for so long? Why allow him to travel with it, to risk damaging it at county fairs and small-town carnivals? And why wait until now to collect, when Marcus had just inherited the property and was clearly in no position to pay off a multi-million-dollar debt? "I need to verify these documents," Marcus said, trying to buy time. "Have them examined by a lawyer. Make sure everything is legitimate." "Of course," Castellano said, but his smile suggested he knew exactly what any lawyer would find. "However, I should mention that the interest continues to accrue daily. By my calculations, you now owe approximately $2.7 million, and that number grows by several $100s each day you delay." Marcus felt trapped, caught between impossible choices with no good options. If he revealed what he had discovered about the carousel's true value, These people would simply adjust their claims accordingly. If he didn't, he would lose the most valuable thing he had ever owned to what might be an elaborate fraud. And underlying everything was the nagging question of who these people really were and how they had learned about his inheritance so quickly. "I'm going to need 48 hours," Marcus said finally, "to get legal advice, to understand my options. If your claim is legitimate, then I'll cooperate fully. But I'm not signing anything or agreeing to anything until I know where I stand legally." Castellanos studied him for a long moment, and Marcus had the uncomfortable feeling that the man was seeing right through his desperate bluff. "Very well, 48 hours. But I should warn you that my employer is not a patient man, and there are costs associated with delaying the resolution of this matter. I would hate for your situation to become more complicated than it already is." The threat was clear, and Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. These were not the kind of people who accepted delays gracefully, and 48 hours might not be enough to figure out a solution. But it was all the time he could buy, and he would have to make the most of it. As Castellano and his men packed up their documents and prepared to leave, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. Instead of driving home to agonize over his impossible situation, he pulled out his phone and called Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell at Columbia University. If he was going to lose the carousel anyway, he at least wanted to know for certain what he was losing. Dr. Hartwell's voice was breathless with excitement when Marcus explained what he had found. She had been researching the lost Carousel of Wonderland for decades, following leads that had always ended in disappointment. The photographs Marcus emailed to her were the first concrete evidence she had ever seen that the piece still existed. She was willing to drive out from New York City that very afternoon to examine the carousel in person, and if it was authentic, she had contacts at major auction houses who would be very interested in what might be the art find of the decade. But Marcus's excitement was tempered by the knowledge that time was running out. Even if the carousel was worth tens of millions of dollars, he couldn't sell it if he didn't legally own it. And Castellanos' documents had looked disturbingly official, complete with notary seals and legal stamps that would be difficult to fake. The answer came from an unexpected source. As Marcus was preparing to leave the tent and drive home to collect Lily from her babysitter, his phone buzzed with an incoming call from a number he didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was elderly and shaky, but the words were clear and urgent. "Is this Marcus Chen, Samuel's nephew?" the caller asked. "My name is Arthur Goldstein. I was your uncle's lawyer for 40 years, and I need to talk to you about something very important. Something Sam made me promise to tell you if anything ever happened to him." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "Mr. Goldstein, I'm glad you called. There are some people claiming my uncle owed them money, that they have a claim on his property. Do you know anything about that?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line, followed by what sounded like a bitter laugh. "Oh, I know all about Vincent Castellano and his employer, and I know exactly why they're coming for that carousel now. Mr. Chen, we need to meet immediately. There are things about your uncle's past that you need to understand, and there isn't much time." An hour later, Marcus sat in the cluttered office of Arthur Goldstein, Esquire, listening to a story that seemed too incredible to be true. According to the elderly lawyer, Uncle Sam had indeed borrowed money from dangerous people in the 1980s, but not to save his circus. He had borrowed it to hide the carousel, to keep it safe from other dangerous people who had been hunting for it since the end of World War II. The carousel originally belonged to the Rothenberg family, wealthy art collectors in Berlin. Goldstein explained, his weathered hands shaking slightly as he poured coffee from a thermos. When the Nazis came to power, they seized the family's entire collection, including Heinrich Müller's masterpiece. The carousel disappeared for years, presumably destroyed in the bombing of Berlin. Marcus leaned forward, fascinated, despite his growing anxiety about Castellano's deadline. But it wasn't destroyed. It was stolen by a Nazi officer named Klaus Richter, who smuggled it out of Germany near the end of the war. Richter sold it to a private collector in Argentina, who eventually brought it to America. Your uncle acquired it legitimately from that collector's estate in 1962, but by then, other parties had learned of its existence. Goldstein opened a thick file folder and pulled out photographs that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. They showed the carousel in its full glory, completely restored and housed in what appeared to be a private mansion. The horses gleamed with fresh paint, their saddles bright with gold leaf, the brass poles polished to mirror brightness. It was the most beautiful thing Marcus had ever seen. The Rothenberg family survivors have been searching for this piece for 80 years, Goldstein continued. They have the legal right to reclaim it as stolen property, but there are also other parties with claims, including the Nazi hunter organization that has been tracking Richter's stolen artifacts for decades. Marcus felt his head spinning with the complexity of what he was learning. So Castellano represents the Rothenbergs? Oh no, Goldstein said grimly. Castellano works for someone much more dangerous. There is a private collector, a man known only as the Patron, who specializes in acquiring stolen Nazi art through whatever means necessary. He's been hunting this carousel for 40 years, and he's not the kind of person who accepts legal obstacles. The pieces began falling into place in Marcus's mind. So Uncle Sam borrowed money from this patron to hide the carousel, to keep it away from him? Exactly. Sam took out a loan that he never intended to repay, using the money to make the carousel disappear into the county fair circuit where no one would think to look for a priceless work of art. But the patron is patient, and he knew that eventually Sam would die and the carousel would surface again. Marcus stared at the photographs, his mind racing with implications. What am I supposed to do with this information? Even if Castellano's loan documents are fake, this patron guy isn't going to just walk away. And if the Rothenbergs have a legal claim, I can't sell it anyway. Goldstein smiled for the first time since Marcus had arrived. Actually, you can. The Rothenberg family reached a settlement with the German government years ago, accepting compensation for their stolen art in exchange for releasing their legal claims. As for the patron's loan, let me show you something very interesting. The lawyer pulled out another document, this one bearing Uncle Sam's familiar signature. It was a promissory note for $500,000, dated 1987, but with one crucial difference from the document Castellano had shown him. This version included a clause stating that if the borrower died without heirs who were aware of the carousel's true value, the debt would be considered satisfied, and the collateral would revert to the borrower's estate. Your uncle was cleverer than anyone gave him credit for, Goldstein explained. He knew that someday you would inherit the carousel, and he wanted to make sure you would have the legal right to decide its fate. The document Castellano showed you as a forgery, missing this crucial clause that your uncle insisted on, including in the original agreement. Marcus felt a surge of hope mixed with terror. If this was true, if he actually owned the carousel free and clear, then Dr. Hartwell's authentication could make him wealthy beyond his wildest dreams. But it also meant that he was now standing between some very dangerous people and something they had been trying to acquire for 4 decades. What do I do? He asked simply. Goldstein's expression was grave. You have 3 choices, Marcus. You can sell to the patron for whatever he's willing to pay and walk away alive, but not wealthy. You can try to go through legal channels, which will take years and may result in you losing everything anyway when the various claims are sorted out. Or you can be very smart, very careful, and very fast about getting this carousel authenticated and sold at public auction before anyone can stop you. How fast are we talking? Dr. Hartwell's authentication, if positive, can be expedited through her contacts at Sotheby's. They have a major decorative arts auction scheduled for next month, and they would bump other pieces to include a confirmed Muller carousel. But you would need to get the piece restored and transported to New York within 2 weeks. Marcus thought about his daughter, about the life he wanted to give her, about the medical debt that was crushing them both. Then he thought about Uncle Sam, who had spent 30 years pretending to own a worthless piece of junk while protecting one of the world's most valuable works of art. Tell me what I need to do, he said. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of activity that felt like something from a spy novel. Dr. Hartwell arrived from New York with a team of graduate students and specialized equipment, transforming the rotting circus tent into a makeshift laboratory for carousel authentication. Marcus watched in fascination as they carefully cleaned sections of each horse, revealing layers of paint and carving details that had been hidden for decades. The authentication process was meticulous and nerve-wracking. Dr. Hartwell examined every detail with the intensity of a detective solving a murder case, comparing the carousel's features to her extensive database of Heinrich Müller's known works. She analyzed the wood grain, the carving techniques, the paint composition, and the metal fittings, building a comprehensive case for the piece's provenance. Meanwhile, Marcus had called in sick for 2 more days and arranged for Lily to stay with her grandmother, Sarah's mother, who lived 3 hours away. It was safer to have his daughter out of town while he dealt with the dangerous game he found himself playing. He told her it was a special visit, But the goodbye hug at Grandma's door had lasted longer than usual, as if they both sensed that their lives were about to change in ways neither could imagine. The breakthrough came on the second day, when one of Dr. Hartwell's students discovered something extraordinary while cleaning the lead horse. Hidden beneath layers of overpainting was a small signature, barely visible even under magnification, but unmistakably Heinrich Müller's distinctive mark. Combined with the plaque Marcus had found, and the documented provenance that Goldstein provided, it was enough to authenticate the carousel as genuine beyond any reasonable doubt. "This is the find of the century," Dr. Hartwell breathed, her eyes shining with the excitement of a scholar whose life's work had just been vindicated. The lost carousel of Wonderland, in remarkably good condition despite its rough treatment. The art world is going to go absolutely insane when this hits the auction circuit. The restoration work began at dawn on the third day, as a team of specialized craftsmen arrived in unmarked trucks that had been arranged through Dr. Hartwell's extensive network of museum contacts. Marcus watched in amazement as these artists began the delicate process of bringing Heinrich Müller's masterpiece back to life. Each horse was carefully dismounted from the carousel platform and transported to a climate-controlled trailer that had been converted into a mobile workshop. The lead restorer, a soft-spoken woman named Catherine Mills, who had previously worked on pieces for the Metropolitan Museum of Art, explained the process as her team began their work. Every layer of paint had to be analyzed and documented before any cleaning could begin. The original pigments, nearly 120 years old, were incredibly fragile and required special solvents that could remove decades of grime without damaging the artwork beneath. Marcus found himself hypnotized by the transformation taking place before his eyes. As Catherine worked on the lead horse, the one Lily had called Rosalind, the layers of neglect began to fall away like a chrysalis opening to reveal a butterfly. The horse's mane, which had appeared dull gray in the dim light of the tent, emerged as a flowing cascade of deep mahogany, highlighted with threads of gold. The saddle, once hidden beneath peeling paint and rust stains, revealed itself to be a masterwork of decorative artistry, covered in painted roses so lifelike they seemed ready to bloom. But it was the eyes that truly brought the carousel to life. As Catherine carefully cleaned around the led horse's face, she uncovered glass eyes of the deepest blue, hand-blown and set with such skill that they seemed to hold awareness and intelligence. When she stepped back to examine her work, even the normally professional restoration team fell silent with wonder. "I've worked on carousel horses before," Catherine murmured, almost to herself. "But I've never seen anything like this. Müller didn't just carve these animals, he gave them souls." The work continued around the clock, with team members taking shifts to ensure continuous progress. Marcus barely slept during this period, dividing his time between watching the restoration and fielding increasingly urgent phone calls from Castellanos people. The 48-hour deadline had passed, and the pressure was mounting with each conversation. "Mr. Chen, my employer's patience is wearing thin," Castellano had warned during their last conversation. "Every day you delay costs him money and inconvenience. I would strongly advise you to reconsider your position before this becomes more complicated than either of us would prefer." Arthur Goldstein had coached Marcus on how to handle these calls, advising him to remain polite but non-committal, while the authentication and restoration work continued. The goal was to buy enough time to get the carousel to New York and into Sotheby's secure facility, where it would be protected by both legal procedures and physical security that even someone like the patron would hesitate to challenge. On the fourth day, as the restoration work entered its final phase, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. He was examining newly revealed details on one of the smaller horses when he heard a car door slam in the parking area outside the tent. Expecting another confrontation with Castellanos' people, he was surprised to see a young woman in her early 30s walking toward the tent entrance, her dark hair pulled back in a professional bun, and her clothes suggesting someone accustomed to dealing with valuable objects. "Mr. Chen?" she called out, her voice carrying a slight accent that Marcus couldn't immediately place. "My name is Rebecca Rothenberg. I believe we need to talk." Marcus felt his pulse quicken as he recognized the surname. According to Goldstein's research, the Rothenberg family had been the carousel's original owners before it was stolen by the Nazis. If this woman was here to reclaim it, everything he had worked for could disappear in an instant. Rebecca approached with confident steps, but her expression was more curious than confrontational. She paused at the edge of the restoration area, her eyes widening as she took in the scope of the work being performed. "My God," she whispered, "it really is the Carousel of Wonderland." "Ms. Rothenberg," Marcus began carefully, "if you're here to make some kind of legal claim—" "I'm not," she interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. "My family settled those claims decades ago. We accepted compensation from the German government and released our legal rights to the stolen pieces. But that doesn't mean I'm not interested in seeing justice done." She moved closer to the restored horses, her eyes tracing the intricate details with the appreciation of someone who understood their significance. "This carousel belonged to my great-grandmother, Anna Rothenberg. She commissioned it from Heinrich Müller in 1904 as a gift for her grandchildren. I grew up hearing stories about it, about how beautiful it was, how it had been the centerpiece of their estate outside Berlin." Marcus relaxed slightly, sensing that this woman posed no immediate threat to his ownership of the piece. "What brings you here now?" Rebecca's expression darkened. "Vincent Castellano contacted me 2 days ago. He claimed to represent my family's interests and wanted information about the carousel's provenance. When I told him we had no current claim on the piece, he became very unpleasant. He suggested that it would be unfortunate if anything happened to prevent the carousel from reaching its rightful destination. Which would be? That's what I'm here to discuss. Mr. Chen, there are people in the art world who know about your situation. Word travels fast when a lost masterpiece is discovered, and not everyone who hears that news has good intentions. Castellano's employer, this person they call the patron, has a reputation for acquiring pieces through intimidation and force when legal methods fail." Marcus felt a chill as he realized that their efforts to keep the authentication secret had failed. If Rebecca Rothenberg knew about it, then others did as well, including people who might be willing to take extreme measures to claim the carousel for themselves. "What do you suggest?" Marcus asked. Rebecca pulled out her phone and showed him a photograph of an elegant auction catalog. "Sotheby's has agreed to fast-track the authentication process and include the carousel in their November auction. But they need it in their New York facility within the next 5 days to complete the cataloging and marketing. After that, it becomes a matter of public record, and even the patron won't be able to simply make it disappear." She paused, studying Marcus's face. "But getting it there safely will require more than just a moving truck. You're going to need protection, and you're going to need people who understand how to deal with someone like Castellano's employer." "What kind of protection?" "The kind that my family has been using for 80 years to recover our stolen art and protect the pieces we've managed to find. There's a network of people who specialize in this sort of situation: lawyers, security professionals, art handlers who know how to move valuable pieces without attracting unwanted attention." Marcus considered her offer, weighing his limited options. He could try to transport the carousel on his own, but if Castellano's people were monitoring his activities, they could intercept it anywhere between Millbrook Falls and New York City. Or he could accept help from someone whose family had been dealing with stolen Nazi art for decades and presumably knew what they were doing. "What's your interest in all this?" he asked finally. "If your family doesn't have a legal claim, why do you care what happens to the carousel?" Rebecca's expression softened, and for the first time since arriving, she looked more like a person than a professional. "Because it represents something important that was taken from my family, even if we can't legally reclaim it. Because watching it disappear into some private collection where no one will ever see it again would be another kind of theft. And because Anna Rothenberg commissioned this carousel to bring joy to children, not to enrich criminals who deal in stolen art." She gestured toward the restored horses, their vibrant colors gleaming under the work lights. "If this goes to auction legitimately, if it ends up in a museum or with a collector who will share it with the world, then something good will have come from all the darkness surrounding its history. But if the patron gets his hands on it, it will disappear again, possibly for another 80 years. Marcus looked at the carousel, at the hours of painstaking work that Catherine and her team had invested in bringing it back to life. He thought about Lily's reaction when she had first seen the horses, how she had immediately understood that they were special, that they deserved to be loved and cared for. And he thought about Uncle Sam, who had spent 30 years protecting this masterpiece by hiding it in plain sight among the honest pleasures of county fairs and small-town carnivals. "All right," he said finally. "What do we need to do?" The plan Rebecca outlined was complex but thorough. The carousel would be disassembled into its component parts and transported in multiple vehicles along different routes to New York. Each shipment would be accompanied by armed guards and tracked by GPS, with backup teams standing by in case of problems. Dr. Hartwell would travel with the authentication documents, while Marcus and the legal paperwork would take a separate route entirely. But first, they had to deal with Castellano and his increasingly urgent demands for a meeting. Rather than continuing to delay, Rebecca suggested a different approach. Give him exactly what he wanted, but on their terms, and in a location of their choosing. "He's expecting you to be afraid, to be overwhelmed by the situation," she explained as they worked out the details. "But if you meet with him confidently, with proper legal representation, you can control the narrative. Make him prove his claims rather than just accepting them." The meeting was arranged for the next afternoon at Arthur Goldstein's law office, neutral ground where Castellano couldn't easily intimidate Marcus or make veiled threats. Marcus spent the morning reviewing his legal position with Goldstein and Rebecca, memorizing the key points of his defense against the loan claim. When Castellano arrived, he brought the same two lawyers who had accompanied him to the tent, but his demeanor had changed noticeably. Where before he had been smooth and confident, now there was an edge of impatience that suggested his employer was applying pressure from above. The delay had cost him more than just time. It had cost him credibility with someone who didn't tolerate failure. "Mr. Chen," Castellano began, his voice tight with controlled frustration, "I hope you've had sufficient time to consider your situation. My employer has been more than generous in his patience, but that patience is not infinite." "I appreciate his patience," Marcus replied, his voice steadier than he felt. "And I've had time to review the documents you provided. Unfortunately, they appear to be incomplete." Castellano's eyes narrowed. "Incomplete in what way?" Arthur Goldstein leaned forward, placing the original promissory note on the table between them. "This is the complete version of the loan agreement your client signed with Mr. Chen's uncle. As you can see, it includes a clause that your version conveniently omits. The clause states that if the borrower dies and his heir is unaware of the collateral's true value, the debt is considered satisfied." Castellano examined the document, his face growing increasingly dark as he read. "This is a forgery. My client would never have agreed to such terms." "Then I suggest you take the matter up with the notary who witnessed the signing." Goldstein replied smoothly. "Mrs. Henderson is still alive and practicing in Millbrook Falls. She remembers the transaction quite clearly, particularly the unusual clause that your client insisted on including." For the first time since Marcus had met him, Castellano appeared to be genuinely rattled. He exchanged glances with his lawyers, clearly calculating his options. "Even if this document is authentic, it doesn't change the fundamental facts. The carousel belongs to my client as security for the loan. Your interpretation of this clause is questionable at best." "Perhaps," Goldstein agreed. "But it's questionable enough to tie this matter up in court for years, while the various claims are sorted out. And during that time, Mr. Chen retains possession of the carousel and the right to make decisions about its disposition." Rebecca chose that moment to speak up, her voice cutting through the tension in the room like a blade, "including the right to consign it to public auction while the legal questions are being resolved." Castellano whipped his head around to stare at her, and Marcus saw recognition flash in his eyes. "Ms. Rothenberg, I wasn't aware you had an interest in this matter." "My interest is in seeing that stolen art finds its way to legitimate buyers rather than disappearing into private collections," she replied evenly. "The carousel is being consigned to Sotheby's for their November auction. The proceeds will be held in escrow pending resolution of any legitimate claims." "That's unacceptable," Castellano said, his mask of civility finally slipping completely. "My employer has invested considerable resources in tracking this piece. He will not be denied by legal technicalities and procedural delays." "Then perhaps he should have been more careful about the terms of his original agreement," Marcus said, finding his voice and his courage at the same time. "My uncle was obviously smarter than anyone gave him credit for. He protected both the carousel and my inheritance with that clause. Castellano stood abruptly, his lawyers scrambling to follow suit. "This isn't over, Chen. Not by a long shot. My employer doesn't accept defeat gracefully, and he has resources you can't imagine. I would strongly advise you to reconsider this course of action before it becomes dangerous for everyone involved." After the three men left, the room fell into silence, broken only by the sound of traffic outside and the ticking of an old clock on Goldstein's desk. Marcus felt drained by the confrontation, but also oddly exhilarated. For the first time since inheriting the Carousel, he felt like he had some measure of control over his situation. "How much time do we have?" he asked Rebecca. "Not much," she admitted. "Once Castellano reports back to his employer, things are going to escalate quickly. We need to get the Carousel moved tonight, before they have a chance to regroup and plan their next move." The remainder of the afternoon passed in a whirlwind of activity as the transportation plan went into effect. Catherine Mills supervised the careful packing of each restored Carousel piece, wrapping them in custom-made protective materials that would keep them safe during the journey to New York. Each horse was crated individually, with foam padding and shock-absorbing materials to prevent any damage during transport. Marcus watched the process with mixed emotions. Part of him was excited about the potential value of what he was shipping off to auction, but another part mourned the loss of something that had been part of his family's history for so long. Uncle Sam had traveled thousands of miles with this Carousel, bringing joy to countless children at county fairs and small-town celebrations. Now it was being packed away like museum pieces, valuable but somehow sterile compared to its former life. As evening fell, the convoy began to take shape in the parking area outside the tent. 3 large moving trucks had arrived, along with 2 SUVs that contained the security personnel Rebecca had arranged. The men and women who emerged from these vehicles moved with the quiet professionalism of people accustomed to protecting valuable cargo, their eyes constantly scanning the surrounding area for potential threats. Dr. Hartwell took custody of the authentication documents and photographs, securing them in a specially designed briefcase that would accompany her on a commercial flight to New York. The legal paperwork went with Arthur Goldstein, who would drive separately with his own security detail. This left Marcus with the strange responsibility of overseeing the transport of something worth tens of millions of dollars, while trying to act like a normal person going about ordinary business. Rebecca rode with him in his own car, which would follow the convoy at a discreet distance. She had changed into dark clothing and carried a small bag that Marcus suspected contained items he didn't want to know about. Her transformation from art historian to security professional was complete, and he found himself both grateful for her help and slightly intimidated by her competence. "Try to stay calm," she advised as they pulled out of the parking area and onto the highway. "The most dangerous time is going to be the next few hours, while we're still in territory where Castellano's people can easily intercept us. Once we cross state lines and get closer to New York, we'll have more protection and legal options." Marcus gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, his eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror for signs of pursuit. Every set of headlights behind them could potentially be a threat. Every car that passed them on the highway a possible enemy. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him like a physical force, making it difficult to breathe normally. They had been driving for about an hour when Rebecca's phone buzzed with an incoming message. She read it quickly, her expression growing grim. "We've got company," she said quietly. The surveillance team spotted 3 vehicles following the convoy. "They're maintaining distance but definitely tracking our movements." Marcus felt his pulse spike with adrenaline. "What do we do?" "We stick to the plan. The convoy will take evasive action at the next major junction, splitting up to confuse anyone following them. We'll continue on our route and meet them at the predetermined rendezvous point." The next 20 minutes were the longest of Marcus's life. He tried to drive normally while every instinct screamed at him to either floor the accelerator or pull over and hide. Rebecca remained calm, occasionally speaking quietly into her phone to coordinate with the other vehicles, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders and the way her hand never strayed far from her bag. The rendezvous point was a truck stop about 50 miles outside Millbrook Falls, chosen because it offered multiple exit routes and enough ambient activity to provide cover for the convoy to regroup. Marcus pulled into the parking area and immediately spotted the 3 moving trucks arranged near the fuel pumps, their crews working with practiced efficiency to refuel and perform security checks on their cargo. But it was what he didn't see that made his blood run cold. One of the escort vehicles was missing, and when Rebecca's phone rang, the conversation that followed confirmed his worst fears. "They hit the rear guard about 10 miles back," she reported after ending the call. "Professional operation, blocked the road and forced them to stop. No one was hurt, but they're out of commission. We're down to half our security team." Marcus stared at her, feeling the carefully constructed plan falling apart around him. "Do we abort? Go back and try again later." "Numbers, if we go back now, they'll be ready for us. Our best chance is to continue with reduced security and hope we can reach New York before they can mount another interception attempt." The decision was made for them when one of the security team leaders approached their car, his face grim with professional concern. "Ma'am, we've got multiple vehicles in the area that don't belong. They're not moving in yet, but they're definitely positioning for something. We need to move now or risk losing the entire shipment." Rebecca nodded curtly. "Execute the emergency protocol. All units proceed to the alternate route. Maximum speed. Radio silence until we reach the safe zone." The convoy reformed quickly, but with noticeably fewer escort vehicles than had left Millbrook Falls. Marcus found himself in the middle of a high-speed chase scene that felt surreal after a lifetime of ordinary suburban existence. The moving trucks ahead of them were pushing the speed limit, their emergency flashers creating a strobing light show against the darkness of the highway. Behind them, Rebecca reported intermittent sightings of pursuing vehicles, always staying just far enough back to avoid direct confrontation but close enough to track their movements. It became a chess game played out at 70 miles per hour, with each side trying to anticipate the other's next move while maintaining the pretense of normal highway traffic. The crisis came at a construction zone about 30 miles from the New York state line. The highway narrowed to a single lane, creating a natural choke point where the convoy would be vulnerable to attack. As they approached the work zone, Rebecca's phone exploded with urgent communications from the lead vehicles. "They're moving in," she reported tersely. "Multiple vehicles closing from front and rear. They're going to try to box us in at the construction zone." Marcus could see it happening in real time through his windshield. Black SUVs were weaving through traffic ahead of the convoy, positioning themselves to block the narrow lane through the construction area. Behind them, more vehicles were closing the distance, turning what should have been a routine highway drive into something resembling a military operation. The lead security vehicle made a split-second decision that probably saved the entire operation. Instead of entering the construction zone where they would be trapped, the convoy suddenly veered off at the last available exit, abandoning the highway for a network of rural roads that would be harder to block, but also slower and more dangerous to navigate. Marcus found himself following 3 massive moving trucks down winding country roads at speeds that would have been reckless under normal circumstances. His car's suspension complained as they hit potholes and rough pavement, and he could only imagine what the carousel pieces were experiencing inside their protective crates. But the desperate gamble paid off. The rural roads offered dozens of alternative routes and intersections where the convoy could change direction without warning. The pursuing vehicles, designed for highway speeds and urban environments, found themselves at a disadvantage on the narrow, twisting country lanes. Gradually, the reports of pursuit became less frequent, then ceased altogether. The convoy had successfully broken free from Castellanos' people, at least for the moment. But they were still hours away from New York City, and everyone knew that their enemies would be working frantically to predict their destination and set up new intercept points. The final approach to the city was made in the early morning hours, when traffic was light and the convoy could move quickly through the urban maze toward Sotheby's storage facility. Marcus had never been so happy to see city lights and tall buildings, symbols of civilization and legal protection that seemed like sanctuary after the dangerous game they had been playing on the dark highways. The unloading process at Sotheby's was swift and professional, with uniformed guards and art handlers taking custody of each crate as it was removed from the trucks. Marcus signed papers transferring responsibility for the carousel to the auction house, officially beginning the process that would put Heinrich Müller's masterpiece on the international art market. As the last crate disappeared into the secure storage facility, Marcus felt a profound mixture of relief and loss. He had successfully protected Uncle Sam's legacy and potentially secured his family's financial future, but he had also given up the last physical connection to the man who had raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 12. Rebecca seemed to understand his conflicted emotions as they stood in the pre-dawn darkness outside the auction house. "He would have been proud of you," she said quietly. "Your uncle spent 30 years protecting that carousel, and you found a way to honor that protection while still fulfilling his wishes for your future. How can you be sure?" Marcus asked. She smiled, the first genuine expression of warmth he had seen from her since they met. "Because Anna Rothenberg commissioned that carousel to bring joy to children, and your uncle continued that tradition for 3 decades. Now it will be preserved properly and displayed where millions of people can appreciate its beauty." That's exactly what both of them would have wanted. The auction catalog featuring the Lost Carousel of Wonderland was released 2 weeks later, sending shockwaves through the international art community. The authentication was ironclad, the provenance was clear, and the restoration had revealed details that even carousel experts had never seen in photographs. Pre-auction estimates ranged from $15 to $25 million, with some experts suggesting that competitive bidding could drive the final price even higher. Marcus returned to Millbrook Falls to find that his life had become the subject of intense media scrutiny. Reporters camped outside his house, art historians called requesting interviews, and museum curators offered to arrange private viewings of the carousel before the auction. He tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy for Lily's sake, but it was impossible to ignore the fact that their lives had been fundamentally altered by Uncle Sam's final gift. The harassment from Castellano's people had ceased abruptly after the carousel reached New York, replaced by an ominous silence that was somehow more unsettling than the previous threats. Rebecca warned him that the patron's withdrawal from direct confrontation might indicate a shift to legal challenges or other forms of pressure, but for now, Marcus was simply grateful for the respite. 3 days before the auction, he received an unexpected phone call that would change everything one final time. The voice on the other end was elderly and heavily accented, speaking English with the careful precision of someone for whom it was not a native language. "Mr. Chen, my name is Heinrich Muller," the caller said, and Marcus felt his world tilt sideways. "I am the great-grandson of the carousel's creator, and I have something very important to tell you about what you are about to sell." Marcus gripped the phone tighter, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. Heinrich Muller had died in the 1920s, nearly a century ago. This had to be some kind of elaborate hoax, another attempt by Castellano or his employer to disrupt the auction through psychological manipulation. "I know what you're thinking," the voice continued, as if reading his thoughts. "My great-grandfather passed away in 1924, but his work did not die with him. There are things about the Carousel of Wonderland that were never documented, secrets that have been passed down through our family for generations." "What kind of secrets?" Marcus asked, despite his skepticism. Something in the old man's voice carried a weight of truth that was difficult to dismiss. "The carousel is not merely a work of art, Mr. Chen. It is also a puzzle, designed by my great-grandfather to hide something of enormous value. Something that the Nazi officer who stole it never found. Something that your uncle probably never discovered during all his years of ownership." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "What are you talking about?" Heinrich Muller was not just a carousel carver. He was also a master clockmaker and mechanical engineer. The Rothenberg family commissioned him to create more than just a beautiful amusement ride. They wanted him to design a secure hiding place for their most precious possessions, something that could protect their family treasures even if their estate was overrun by enemies. The old man paused, and Marcus could hear the sound of papers rustling in the background. The carousel contains a hidden mechanism, accessible only to someone who knows the correct sequence of movements. Inside that mechanism is a chamber containing items that make the carousel itself seem worthless by comparison. Marcus's skepticism began to crumble as the pieces of a larger puzzle started falling into place. Uncle Sam's mysterious behavior around the carousel, his insistence on keeping it operational, even when he could no longer afford to maintain the rest of his circus. The way he had always seemed to be protecting something more valuable than a simple amusement ride. "If this is true," Marcus said slowly, "why are you telling me now? Why not before the authentication, before the auction preparations?" "Because I was not certain the carousel had survived," Heinrich replied. "My family lost track of it during the war, and we assumed it had been destroyed like so many other pieces of our heritage. It was only when the Sotheby's catalog was released that I learned the lost Carousel of Wonderland had been found intact." "What's inside the hidden chamber?" The old man's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. the Rothenberg Codex, a medieval manuscript that contains the original formulas for creating the pigments used by Renaissance masters. Also, a collection of uncut diamonds that Anna Rothenberg inherited from her grandmother, worth perhaps $50 million at current market prices. And most valuable of all, a small painting by Leonardo da Vinci that has never been catalogued or displayed publicly. Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath his feet once again. If this was true, if the carousel really contained hidden treasures worth more than the ride itself, then everything they had planned would need to be reconsidered. But it also meant that Heinrich Müller's call might not be the innocent revelation it appeared to be. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" Marcus asked. "How do I know this isn't another attempt to steal the carousel before the auction?" "Because I'm going to tell you how to access the hidden chamber," Henrik replied. "And I'm going to do it without asking for anything in return except that you honor my great-grandfather's intentions." Heinrich Müller designed that hiding place to protect the Rothenberg family treasures. If those treasures still exist, they should be returned to their rightful heirs or donated to institutions where they can be properly preserved and studied. The instructions Henrik provided were surprisingly complex, involving a specific sequence of movements that had to be performed on different parts of the carousel mechanism. According to his great-grandfather's notes, the hidden chamber would only open when the carousel was assembled and certain horses were positioned at precise angles, while specific musical notes were played on the original calliope. Marcus realized that accessing the chamber would require reassembling the carousel at least partially, which would be impossible to do secretly at Sotheby's facility. But he also understood that if Henrik was telling the truth, the contents of that hidden chamber could be worth far more than the $25 million the carousel itself was expected to bring at auction. After ending the call, Marcus sat in his kitchen staring at the notes he had scribbled while Henrik talked. The old man had provided detailed diagrams and measurements that would be impossible to fabricate without intimate knowledge of the carousel's construction. Either this was an incredibly elaborate hoax involving weeks of preparation, or Heinrich Müller really was the great-grandson of the carousel's creator, and really did possess family secrets that had been hidden for over a century. The decision of what to do with this information weighed heavily on Marcus as he drove to pick up Lily from her grandmother's house. His daughter had been staying there for nearly 2 weeks while he dealt with the carousel situation, and he missed her presence more than he had expected. When she ran into his arms at her grandmother's front door, he felt a sense of completeness that had been missing during all the excitement and danger of the past few weeks. "Daddy, did you save the horses?" she asked as they drove home, her small hand resting trustingly in his. "Are they going to be happy now?" Marcus looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror, struck once again by her ability to see straight to the heart of complex situations. "I think so, sweetheart. They're going to a place where lots of people will be able to see how beautiful they are." "But will they still be able to make children happy?" "That's what they were made for." The innocence of her question hit him like a physical blow. Lily was right, of course. The carousel had been created to bring joy to children, not to sit in a museum or private collection where it would be admired but never used for its intended purpose. And if Heinrich Müller was telling the truth about the hidden chamber, then perhaps there was a way to honor both the carousel's artistic value and its original purpose. That evening, after Lily was safely asleep, Marcus called Rebecca Rothenberg. He explained Henrik's call and the claims about hidden treasures, watching her expression change from skepticism to fascination as he repeated the old man's instructions for accessing the secret chamber. "It's possible," she said finally. Anna Rothenberg was known for her paranoia about theft and her elaborate security measures. She had hidden safes installed throughout her estate, and she was obsessed with protecting her family's art collection from both criminals and political upheaval. "So you think Henrik is telling the truth?" "I think it's worth investigating, but accessing that chamber will require pulling the carousel out of the auction, at least temporarily." "Are you prepared for the financial risk if it turns out to be empty?" Marcus considered the question seriously. The carousel was already authenticated and catalogued for auction. Withdrawing it now would cost him the listing fees and potentially damage its reputation with future buyers. But if the hidden chamber contained even half of what Henrik claimed, the financial reward would be enormous. More importantly, it would give him options he didn't currently have. Instead of simply selling the carousel to the highest bidder, He could potentially donate it to a museum while keeping the hidden treasures to secure his family's future. It was a solution that would honor both Uncle Sam's protective instincts and the Carousel's original purpose as a source of wonder and joy. "Let's do it," he decided, "but we'll need Hendricks' help to make sure we're following his great-grandfather's instructions correctly." The logistics of withdrawing the carousel from auction and reassembling it for investigation proved to be surprisingly complicated. Sotheby's was initially resistant to the idea, pointing out that the catalog had already been distributed and potential bidders were making travel arrangements to attend the sale. But Rebecca's connections in the art world carried significant weight, and eventually the auction house agreed to a temporary postponement pending the resolution of newly discovered provenance issues. Henrik Muller arrived in New York 2 days later, a frail man in his 80s who carried himself with the dignity of someone who had spent his life preserving family traditions. He examined the carousel pieces with the reverence of a pilgrim visiting a holy shrine, running his weathered hands over details that his great-grandfather had carved more than a century earlier. "It is exactly as he described it," Henrik murmured, tears gathering in his eyes. "Every horse, every decoration, precisely as it appears in his workshop notes. To see it restored to its original beauty is like witnessing a resurrection." The reassembly took place in a private warehouse that Sotheby's used for large installations, with a small team of trusted technicians working under Hendricks' careful supervision. Each piece had to be positioned exactly as it would have been in the original configuration, with the carousel fully operational and capable of rotation. Marcus watched the process with growing amazement, as the individual horses were mounted on their brass poles and the central mechanism was calibrated to Hendricks' exacting specifications. When the restoration team activated the carousel for the first time in decades, the sight of those magnificent horses rising and falling in their eternal dance brought tears to his eyes. But it was when the calliope began to play, filling the warehouse with the tinkling melody of the Blue Danube, that the real magic happened. Hendrik positioned himself at the carousel's control panel, a complex array of levers and switches that controlled not just the ride's movement but also various mechanical functions that had never been fully understood. Following his great-grandfather's coded instructions, Hendrik began a precise sequence of operations. He rotated the carousel to a specific position, then manipulated individual horses to exact angles while the music played particular notes. The process took nearly an hour, with each step carefully verified against the faded diagrams Hendrik had brought from Germany. Nothing happened at first, and Marcus began to worry that either the mechanism had been damaged over the years or Hendrik's information was incomplete. But then, just as the calliope finished its third repetition of the waltz, there was a soft clicking sound from deep within the carousel's central hub. A section of ornate metalwork that had appeared to be purely decorative suddenly swung open on hidden hinges, revealing a dark cavity within the carousel's mechanical heart. Hendrik produced a flashlight and illuminated the interior of the chamber, exposing a collection of objects that had been hidden from the world for over 80 years. The Rothenburg Codex was the first item Hendrik carefully extracted from the chamber. The medieval manuscript was wrapped in oiled silk that had protected it from moisture and decay, and even a cursory examination revealed illuminated pages covered in formulas and diagrams that had been lost to art history for centuries. Dr. Hartwell, who had been present for the investigation, immediately recognized its significance. "This is extraordinary," she breathed, examining the manuscript with white cotton gloves. "These are the original recipes for ultramarine blue, for the gold leaf techniques used in Byzantine icons, for pigments that Renaissance artists considered trade secrets. This single document could revolutionize our understanding of classical art techniques." The diamonds came next, nestled in individual silk pouches that had preserved their clarity despite decades of confinement. Hendrik counted 27 stones ranging from 5 to 15 carats each, their brilliance undimmed by time. A conservative estimate of their value exceeded Hendrik's prediction by a significant margin. But it was the final item that left everyone speechless. Wrapped in multiple layers of protective cloth was a small wooden panel bearing an image that seemed to glow with inner light, despite its modest size. The painting depicted a young woman in Renaissance dress, her enigmatic smile bearing an unmistakable resemblance to Leonardo da Vinci's other works. "The lost portrait of Isabella d'Este," Hendrik whispered, his voice filled with awe. "My great-grandfather wrote that Anna Rothenburg had acquired it from a private collector in Florence, but art historians have debated its existence for decades. This could be one of the most significant art discoveries of the century." Marcus stared at the collection of treasures laid out before him, his mind struggling to grasp the magnitude of what they had found. The carousel itself was worth perhaps $25 million, but the contents of its hidden chamber represented a value that was almost impossible to calculate. The Leonardo alone could bring 50 to 70 million at auction, while the codex was literally priceless from a historical perspective. But even as he contemplated the financial implications of their discovery, Marcus found himself thinking about Lily's simple question about whether the horses would still be able to make children happy. All the money in the world wouldn't matter if he lost sight of what was truly important in life. "What happens now?" he asked Hendricks. The old man smiled, his weathered face creasing with genuine warmth. "Now you make the same choice my great-grandfather made when he created this hiding place. You decide whether these treasures should remain hidden to benefit one person, or whether they should be shared with the world for everyone's benefit." Rebecca stepped forward, her expression thoughtful. "There's another option. The Rothenberg Family Foundation has been working for decades to recover stolen art and return it to public institutions. We could arrange for the Leonardo and the Codex to be donated to major museums, which would provide you with significant tax benefits while ensuring these treasures are properly preserved and displayed." "And the diamonds?" Marcus asked. "Those were Anna Rothenberg's personal property, hidden to protect them from theft. They have no historical significance beyond their monetary value. Keeping them would simply be claiming what is rightfully yours, as the carousel's legal owner." Marcus walked slowly around the reassembled carousel, watching the horses frozen in their eternal gallop while he considered his options. The financial security represented by the hidden treasures would solve every problem he and Lily faced, but it would also burden him with responsibilities he had never imagined. His decision came to him with surprising clarity, inspired by a memory of Uncle Sam at a county fair 20 years earlier. Marcus had been a teenager then, helping his uncle operate the carousel while families lined up for rides. He remembered watching Sam's face as children climbed onto the painted horses, the pure joy the old man took in creating those moments of wonder and excitement. "I want to donate the Leonardo and the Codex to museums," Marcus announced, "but I also want to keep the carousel together and operational. Instead of selling it at auction, I want to find a way to put it back to work, doing what it was designed to do." The proposal he outlined over the next few hours was ambitious, but achievable. The carousel would be donated to the Smithsonian Institution, where it would become the centerpiece of a new children's museum focused on the history of American entertainment. The diamonds would provide funding for the museum's construction and operation, ensuring that the carousel would be maintained in perfect condition while remaining accessible to millions of children every year. Hendricks approved of the plan wholeheartedly, explaining that it honored both his great-grandfather's artistic vision and Anna Rothenberg's desire to share beauty with future generations. Rebecca worked with her family's foundation to arrange the legal details, ensuring that the Leonardo and Codex would be properly authenticated and displayed at institutions where they could be studied by scholars and enjoyed by the public. The formal announcement of the discovery was made at a press conference that drew international attention to what the media dubbed the Carousel Miracle. Marcus found himself thrust into a spotlight he had never sought, but he used the attention to tell Uncle Sam's story and to emphasize the importance of preserving art for future generations rather than hiding it in private collections. Lily was present for the press conference, sitting in the front row with a dignity that reminded Marcus of her mother. When reporters asked her what she thought about her father's decision to donate the carousel rather than sell it, her answer was simple and profound. "The horses told me they wanted to make children happy," she said seriously. "Now they can do that forever." The construction of the new Children's Museum took 18 months, during which time the carousel underwent a complete restoration that returned it to even better condition than it had enjoyed during its original installation at the Rothenberg estate. Master craftsmen worked from Hendricks' great-grandfather's original notes to recreate details that had been lost over the decades, while modern engineering techniques ensured that the mechanism would operate smoothly for generations to come. Marcus remained involved throughout the process, working with museum designers to create an environment that would showcase the carousel's beauty while making it accessible to children of all ages and abilities. The museum's centerpiece was a vast circular hall with soaring ceilings and walls lined with mirrors that reflected the carousel's movement in infinite repetition, creating a sense of wonder that exceeded even Heinrich Müller's original vision. The grand opening was attended by dignitaries from around the world, But the real celebration began when the doors opened to the public, and children began climbing onto the restored horses for the first time in decades. Marcus stood at the edge of the hall, watching families create new memories on the carousel that had been such an important part of his own family's history. Lily was among the first riders, choosing the lead horse she had named Rosalind during their initial visit to Uncle Sam's rotting tent. As the carousel began to turn and the calliope played its eternal waltz, Marcus saw his daughter's face light up with the same joy he remembered from his own childhood visits to the circus. But it was when he noticed other children pointing excitedly at the horses, their parents explaining the carousel's remarkable history, that Marcus truly understood the value of the choice he had made. The money from the diamonds had provided security for his family's future, but the real treasure was the knowledge that Uncle Sam's legacy would continue to bring happiness to children for generations to come. 6 months after the museum's opening, Marcus received a letter that provided the final piece of the carousel's story. It came from Vincent Castellano, written from a federal prison where he was serving time for art fraud and racketeering. The investigation triggered by the carousel's discovery had exposed a network of stolen art dealers operating throughout the eastern United States, with Castellano's employer, the Patron, revealed to be a wealthy collector who had built his reputation on pieces acquired through intimidation and forgery. "You cost me everything," Castellano wrote, "but I have to admit you played the game better than I expected. Your uncle would have been proud of how you protected his secret and turned it into something meaningful. I spent 40 years hunting that carousel, and in the end, you gave it away to children. There's probably a lesson in that, though I'm too bitter to appreciate it right now." Marcus shared the letter with Rebecca, who had become a close friend during the months of legal negotiations and museum planning. They were sitting in the museum's cafe, watching through the windows as children rode the carousel in the hall beyond, their laughter mixing with the music to create a symphony of pure joy. "Do you ever regret not selling it at auction?" Rebecca asked. "The estimates were up to $30 million by the time we withdrew it from the sale." Marcus considered the question while watching Lily help a younger child climb onto one of the horses. His daughter had grown more confident and outgoing since their lives had stabilized, and she had developed a proprietary affection for the carousel that made her a favorite among the museum's younger visitors. "Never," he said finally. "Uncle Sam spent 30 years protecting that carousel by hiding it among county fair rides where children could enjoy it. Locking it away in a private collection or even displaying it as a static museum piece would have betrayed everything he worked for. And the financial aspect? You could have been one of the wealthiest men in the country." Marcus smiled, pulling out his phone to show her a recent photo of Lily at her new school, surrounded by friends and beaming with the confidence of a child who knew she was loved and secure. "I am one of the wealthiest men in the country. I just measure wealth differently than most people." The carousel continued to turn, its painted horses carrying new generations of children on magical journeys that would become treasured memories. Heinrich Müller's masterpiece had survived wars, thieves, and decades of neglect to fulfill its original purpose once again. And in a small house in Millbrook Falls, Marcus Chen fell asleep each night, knowing that his uncle's final gift had been far more valuable than money could ever measure. The story of the lost carousel of Wonderland became a symbol of hope for art recovery organizations around the world, proving that even the most valuable treasures could find their way back to the public through the actions of people who understood the difference between price and value. Museums reported increased attendance as families sought out historical carousels and other interactive exhibits that combined education with entertainment. Marcus eventually left his job as a substitute teacher to become the museum's director of community outreach, a position that allowed him to share the carousel's story with schools and community groups throughout the region. He never remarried, but he found deep satisfaction in a life devoted to preserving the past for future generations while creating new opportunities for wonder and discovery. Lily grew up to become an art historian like Dr. Hartwell, specializing in the preservation of interactive historical exhibits. She often said that her earliest memory was of touching a sad wooden horse and somehow knowing that it deserved to be loved again. That early intuition had guided her father's most important decision, and it continued to guide her own work in ensuring that art remained accessible to everyone, not just to those wealthy enough to afford private collections. Heinrich Müller lived to see his 90th birthday, spending his final years traveling between the various museums that displayed his great-grandfather's recovered works. He often visited the carousel, delighting in the opportunity to share its hidden history with new generations of enthusiasts. Before his death, he completed a comprehensive book documenting Heinrich Müller's techniques and philosophy, ensuring that the master carver's innovations would not be lost to future craftsmen. The Rothenberg Codex and the Leonardo portrait found permanent homes at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the National Gallery respectively, where they continued to provide new insights into Renaissance art techniques and history. The discovery sparked renewed interest in provenance research and led to the recovery of dozens of other stolen artworks that had been hidden or lost during the chaos of World War II. But perhaps the most important legacy of the Carousel's discovery was the simple reminder that the greatest treasures are often those that bring joy to others. In a world increasingly focused on private accumulation and individual achievement, the story of Marcus Chen and the lost Carousel of Wonderland demonstrated that true wealth could be found in generosity, community, and the preservation of beauty for all to share. The Carousel continues to turn today, its music playing for new families who may never know the full story of its remarkable journey, from a Berlin mansion to a county fair circuit to its final home in the nation's capital. But every child who climbs onto one of Heinrich Müller's magnificent horses becomes part of that story, adding their own chapter to a tale that proves the power of art to transcend time, politics, and circumstance. As Marcus often told visitors to the museum, the real miracle wasn't finding millions of dollars worth of hidden treasure. The real miracle was discovering that the greatest value in life comes not from what we keep for ourselves, but from what we choose to share with the world. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.